I froze the second I saw it, the silver glint of a kitchen knife pressed against Ava's trembling neck. My heart didn't just stop, it shattered. Time collapsed into fragments. The sound of Ava's whimper, the sun casting long shadows across Karen's porch, the breeze tugging at the edge of her dress like it, too, was trying to pull her away. Ava stood there, rigid, eyes wide with terror, her small hands twitching against the grips of her walker. She couldn't speak. She couldn't even cry. Karen was leaning in close, her voice low and venomous, her knuckles white as she held the blade far too close to my daughter's skin. "Stop crying," she hissed, her face twisted into something animal, something unrecognizable. "Stop crying or else." I don't know how I moved, how I forced my legs to run, how I found my voice when my lungs refused to work. I only remember screaming Ava's name, so loud it felt like my soul was tearing in half. Karen didn't flinch. She just turned her head slowly toward me, almost calmly, like I was the one interrupting something sacred. Her eyes were hollow, detached, as if she wasn't even fully present. I was still halfway across the street, my feet pounding the pavement, when the neighbor, Mr. Bennett, came charging from the opposite side, yelling, "Drop the knife!" That finally did it. Karen blinked, as if waking from a trance, then stumbled back, dropping the knife with a dull clang on the wood. Ava collapsed into my arms seconds later, shaking so violently I could barely hold her. All I could do was whisper, "You're okay, baby, you're okay, I've got you," over and over again, even though none of it felt true. The police arrived minutes later, but by then, everything had changed. My daughter had been attacked, not by a stranger in some dark alley, but by a woman who lived across the street. A woman trusted by our HOA. A woman who had smiled at me once while handing me cookies. A woman who now stood in handcuffs, still muttering to herself as officers led her away. And I just kept thinking, this can't be real. This can't be happening. But it was. It did. And the terrifying part is the signs were always there. The notes, the complaints, the hostility that slowly turned into obsession. I should have seen it coming. I should have known this wasn't just neighborly tension. This was hate, rot, something far more dangerous than I dare believe. But to understand how we got here, to the moment my disabled daughter had a knife to her throat on a suburban porch in broad daylight, you need to know what came before. Because this story didn't start with a blade. It started with a smile. We moved to Parkview Meadows in early spring, the kind of spring that promises renewal, with blossoms blooming too fast and sunshine spilling through windows like hope itself. After years of old buildings with broken elevators, narrow hallways, and landlords who treated Ava's needs like inconveniences, we finally found a place that felt possible. The townhouse had a gentle ramp leading to the front door, wide doors that welcomed Ava's walker and wheelchair with ease, and a quiet cul-de-sac where children rode bikes and neighbors waved without asking invasive questions. That's all I ever really wanted for Ava: safety, dignity, and space to just be. She was 11 then, small for her age, but with a brightness that could warm the coldest room. Ava had this remarkable way of turning every object into a story. A fallen leaf was a soldier. A breeze was a ghost with a secret. Her imagination was endless, and her heart even more so. She felt everything deeply: joy, sadness, worry. Even at her age, she could tell when people looked at her and only saw the walker. But Parkview felt different, at least at first. The air was slower here. The neighbors smiled more. And the house next to ours belonged to a woman named Karen, who introduced herself on day one with a warm casserole and a glossy smile. "It's so nice to see young families moving in," she said, glancing down at Ava's walker with a curious tilt of the head. She crouched to Ava's level, spoke softly, and complimented her glittery sneakers. I let my guard down in that moment, a mistake I'd come to regret. Karen wasn't just neighborly, she was involved, too involved. She offered to bring our mail over while we were still unpacking, gave us a printed list of unofficial HOA rules just so we wouldn't get caught off guard. At first, I appreciated the gesture. Moving into a new neighborhood comes with its own invisible minefield of expectations, and she seemed to know them all. She invited us to a welcome brunch she hosted in her backyard. Just 6 other neighbors, mimosas, a few lawn games. It was harmless, even charming. Karen was attentive, chatty, overly polished. She remembered Ava's name, asked about her favorite color, and even promised to drop off some old art supplies her niece had left behind. Ava liked her. That made me feel safe. But then the comments began, soft, subtle, and always wrapped in politeness. You know, the school bus drops off the kids right in front of the cul-de-sac. That might be too noisy for Ava, poor thing. Or, I noticed you leave the walker outside sometimes, might be safer indoors. You never know with all the rain. Each suggestion felt reasonable in isolation, but they kept coming. Have you considered blinds for the front window? Privacy is important. The sidewalk chalk is sweet, but HOA can be funny about cleanliness. It was like a slow, invisible erosion, not enough to shout over, but enough to start wearing me down. I began to notice how often Karen stood outside watering her flowers, even when it wasn't warm. She always knew when we came and went. Once, I caught her staring at Ava through the living room window, expression unreadable. When I smiled and waved, she looked startled and went back inside. I told myself I was overthinking. She was just a nosy neighbor. Every neighborhood has one. But Ava started to notice too. Mom, she asked one night, why does Miss Karen always look sad when she sees me? I didn't have an answer. I didn't want to believe it was sadness. It felt more like disappointment or resentment, as if Ava's presence disrupted something Karen needed to believe about the world. Still, we stayed polite. I brought her banana bread once. She returned the dish 2 weeks later with a cold thank you note and a mention about ants in the area. I should have seen it coming. The tension, the shift. But after so many years of scraping by, fighting for accommodations, trying to smile through other people's discomfort, I just wanted to believe we were finally somewhere safe, somewhere we didn't have to fight. And Karen made it easy to believe that with her casserole dishes, HOA printouts, and forced kindness. For a time, she played the role perfectly, the concerned neighbor, the friendly host, the woman next door who just wanted things a certain way. But behind her smile was something coiled, something waiting. I didn't know then what she was capable of. I didn't know that the same woman who once gifted Ava a coloring book would one day threaten her life with a kitchen knife. I didn't know we were living next to a storm. All I saw was sunshine. And that's how it always begins, with light so blinding you don't see the darkness behind it. Not until it's far too close. The shift wasn't sudden. It came gradually like a storm creeping in beneath a painted sky, unnoticed until the air was thick with pressure. Karen's tone began to change before her words did. She still smiled, still waved, still made her weekly walks across the lawn with her poodle tucked under one arm like a designer purse, but there was something new in her eyes, calculation. One afternoon, she paused as Ava and I were drawing chalk flowers on the sidewalk. Ava was giggling, her hands dusted in pink and yellow powder, when Karen stopped mid-stride. You know, she said lightly, some people on the HOA board are a little particular about how the sidewalk looks. We wouldn't want the community to seem messy. She gave a small laugh, like she was joking, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. That was the first time I felt the shift, the difference between neighborly concern and veiled instruction. I nodded politely, but the word stuck with me. From that day on, Karen's suggestions came more frequently. They were never framed as demands, just helpful little observations. When Ava played her music box on the porch, Karen commented, "She sure likes her tunes, doesn't she? Might be a little overstimulating for the other kids." When Ava accidentally knocked her walker against our front step, Karen looked up from trimming her bushes and said, "That must be hard for the neighbors downstairs, all the noise from the metal." At first, I bit my tongue. I didn't want drama. I didn't want to risk Ava hearing me argue with someone she still thought of as a kind neighbor. But the subtle criticism kept building, layer by layer, until it wasn't so subtle anymore. Then came the complaints. I received an email from the HOA titled, disturbance notification. It claimed we had received multiple noise complaints and cited Ava's frequent emotional outbursts as disruptive to the peace of the community. I sat there staring at the screen, stunned. Ava wasn't loud. She had moments, like any child, when she cried or needed calming, especially when overstimulated or anxious. But those moments were brief and private. How could someone hear that and label it a disturbance? I asked the HOA, who filed the complaints. They declined to say. Confidential reporting, they told me, to protect the comfort and privacy of all residents. I didn't need a name. I already knew. Karen's window directly faced our front porch. She was the only one ever outside during Ava's meltdowns, watching, pretending not to. It was her. Ava began to sense the change, too. She no longer wanted to play outside. What if Miss Karen gets mad? She asked one evening. That question crushed me. Ava, who once used to wave to every passing dog, now flinched when she heard Karen's front door creak open. She didn't want to draw anymore. She stopped singing aloud. She stopped laughing as much. I caught her peeking out the curtains one afternoon and quietly pulling them closed. She was staring again, she whispered. I tried to reassure her. I told her people sometimes look without thinking. But even I didn't believe that anymore. Things escalated further when Ava's friend, Lily, from down the street, stopped visiting. Her mother stopped responding to my texts. Days later, I saw her talking to Karen outside, both nodding, arms crossed. That evening, Lily's mom finally replied, "We've decided it's best to give some space. I hope you understand. No explicación. Just space." It was clear Karen had started poisoning the well, spreading whispers behind our backs, and it was working. The final confirmation came in the form of another HOA letter. This one accused us of creating an unsafe environment for neighbors with children. I nearly laughed from the absurdity. Ava was a child, a disabled one, no less. The letter warned that continued disturbances may lead to formal action. When I called the HOA to protest, the woman on the line, tired, disinterested, said, "We've received enough consistent feedback to justify the concern." I asked again who the complaints were from. Her pause said everything. Again, we can't name anyone, but I'm sure if you speak to your neighbor, you might get some insight. My hands trembled when I hung up. I knew then that Karen wasn't just uncomfortable with us being there. She was actively trying to push us out. Quietly, legally, with paperwork and policies. She didn't need to shout. All she needed to do was make life unbearable, isolate us, and let the rules do the rest. And it was working. Ava stopped smiling when we walked outside. I stopped greeting neighbors. Our world was shrinking not by force, but by fear. We tiptoed through our days, trying not to be too loud, too visible, too much. And all the while, Karen stood across the street in her immaculate garden, clipping roses and sipping iced tea like she hadn't just turned our lives into a minefield. I didn't know then how far she would go. I didn't know she was capable of more than words. But I could feel it, that darkness curling beneath the surface, watching us, waiting. The first time Karen directly confronted Ava, it was under the guise of kindness, as always. Ava had been having a tough morning. She'd gotten overwhelmed after struggling to button her shirt and started crying on the porch while I went inside to grab her backpack. She wasn't loud, just quietly sobbing to herself, head down, cheeks wet. When I returned barely 2 minutes later, Karen was already kneeling in front of her, one hand resting too firmly on Ava's shoulder, the other gesturing sharply. "Big girls don't cry in public, sweetheart," she was saying. "It makes people uncomfortable." Ava's face was pale. Her tears stopped not from comfort, but from fear. I rushed down the ramp and stepped between them. "Karen, please don't talk to my daughter like that," I said firmly. She stood up slowly, straightening her skirt as if I had insulted her. I was just trying to help. But maybe if she had better emotional control, people wouldn't get so upset around her. That moment felt like a switch, like whatever mask Karen had been wearing up until that point had slipped. The next day, a typed note appeared taped to our door. No envelope, no signature. Just one line. Kids who cry should be somewhere else. My blood ran cold. I reported it to the HOA, sent them a photo, but they responded with their usual indifference. We cannot verify the source of the message, and without proof of harassment, no action can be taken. That was their line, their shield, and Karen knew it. Things only got worse from there. That weekend, around 9 p.m., I heard 3 sharp bangs on the shared wall between our living rooms. Ava had been crying softly, she'd spilled her paint set, and some had splattered on her favorite storybook. I was helping her clean it when the bangs came again, louder this time, like someone was slamming a broom handle into the wall. Then silence. I held Ava close and told her it was just noise, just someone being frustrated. But the very next morning, we found another note. This one slipped under the door. Control your child. People are trying to live in peace. That was the word Karen always used, peace, as if Ava's existence was some sort of violent intrusion. I started documenting everything, the notes, the noise, the comments. I emailed the HOA again, this time attaching audio clips and timestamps. Their response? We appreciate your concern. At this time, there is insufficient evidence to support a violation. Ava began having trouble sleeping. She started asking to keep the lights on in her room and refused to go outside unless I was holding her hand. She'd flinch every time Karen walked by the window, shrinking behind curtains or whispering, "Is she watching me?" The life had started to drain from her eyes, not from one big incident, but from 100 small ones. 1,000 cuts to her confidence, her comfort, her sense of safety. One night, I found her packing her favorite stuffed animals into her school backpack. In case we have to leave fast, she explained, that broke me in a way I can't fully describe. I was doing everything I could, calling the HOA, filing noise complaints, trying to capture footage of Karen's behavior. And yet, my child was preparing for escape like a war survivor. The threats grew bolder. One evening, we came home to find Ava's walker tipped over in the front yard, the padding soaked with what smelled like bleach. There were no cameras outside, and, of course, no witnesses. The police came, took a report, and left. They offered a few lines about neighbor disputes and said they'd look into it, but I knew they wouldn't. The system was built to react after damage, not prevent it. Meanwhile, Ava had to sit inside while her only form of mobility was disinfected, dried, and reassembled piece by piece. She asked me, why does she hate me so much? And I didn't know what to say. Because there was no reason, not a logical one, not a fair one. Just a void inside Karen where empathy should have been. At night, I began to hear things, strange creaks outside our window, the faint crunch of gravel near the porch. Once, I found boot prints on the ramp in the morning, even though it had rained all night and we hadn't stepped out since dusk. I stayed up until 3 a.m. some nights, watching through the blinds, half hoping I'd see something I could record, half hoping I wouldn't, because I wasn't sure what I'd do if I saw her there again, watching us, hunting us. I installed new locks. I started carrying pepper spray. I became the version of myself I swore I'd never have to become, suspicious, exhausted, guarded at all times. Then came the final letter from the HOA. A formal warning, this time, ongoing disruption and complaints regarding your child's behavioral episodes have prompted an official review. Further violations may result in fines or eviction proceedings. They were threatening to evict us. Not Karen, not the woman targeting a disabled child with psychological warfare. Us. I called them in fury, read every complaint aloud, referenced every unanswered email. But their answer was the same: we cannot mediate personal disputes between neighbors. Please resolve this matter civilly. Civilly, as if civility was an option we were still allowed, as if we hadn't been dragged into a war we never wanted. At that point, I stopped trying to convince anyone. I stopped begging systems to protect us. I started documenting everything for someone, anyone who might listen later. Because, deep down, I knew something worse was coming. I could feel in my bones. Karen wasn't just angry. She wasn't just controlling. She was unhinged. And when a person like that feels ignored, unchecked, and untouchable, they don't just escalate. They explode. I just didn't know when, or how, or what she would do next. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, it would hurt. It was supposed to be a quick trip, 15 minutes, 20 at most. I had just run out of milk and eggs, and Ava had been up since dawn, unable to sleep, her anxiety clinging to her like a second skin. She'd refused to come with me. Her exact words were, "I don't want her to see me again." I knew who she meant. Karen. She hadn't called her by name in weeks, as if even saying it gave the woman more power. I promised her I'd be fast. I left her with her sketchpad, her headphones, her favorite cartoon playing on low volume. The doors were locked. The blinds were drawn. I gave her the emergency phone and told her, "You don't open the door for anyone, not even me without a knock code." She nodded, curled up on the couch, and tried to smile. It didn't reach her eyes. I was gone exactly 17 minutes. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into the driveway was that the front door was wide open. Not cracked, open. I slammed the car door and sprinted up the walkway, heart already hammering against my ribs like a war drum. "Ava!" I shouted, panic making my voice shrill. No answer. The TV was still playing. Her sketchpad was on the couch, headphones discarded on the floor. The emergency phone lay on the coffee table, untouched. My stomach flipped, and then I heard it, a muffled cry. Somewhere close, not inside the house, but nearby. I ran outside, spinning in all directions. And then I saw them. On Karen's porch, Ava stood trembling, her walker crooked beneath her, and Karen was behind her, holding something. No, not something. A knife. A large silver kitchen knife, glinting under the porch light, just inches from Ava's neck. My entire body turned to ice. I didn't even have time to scream before Karen leaned in and whispered, loudly enough that I heard it from the sidewalk, "Stop crying or else." Ava whimpered, frozen in place, her small fingers clenched white on the walker handles. I moved. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I just ran, tripping over the curb, nearly falling. Get away from her. I screamed. Karen didn't flinch. She looked over her shoulder with a blank expression, like I was interrupting something she had every right to be doing. Her eyes weren't angry. They were gone. Cold. Detached. As if Ava wasn't a little girl anymore. As if she was something less. Something expendable. I was almost there, maybe 10 feet away, when a voice boomed from across the street. "Hey, drop it." It was Mr. Bennett, our elderly neighbor, stepping out of his house with a baseball bat in hand. Karen blinked, like waking from a dream. Her grip loosened. The knife clattered to the wooden porch. Ava collapsed into my arms the second I reached her. Her body was shaking so hard I thought she might pass out. "Mama," she whispered. She said I was bad. I hugged her tighter than I ever had in my life, whispering, "You're safe now. I've got you. You're safe." The sirens arrived 3 minutes later. Someone had already called 911. I think it was Bennett, maybe another neighbor who'd heard my scream. 2 squad cars pulled in, lights flashing, tires screeching. Karen stood on the porch, hands raised, still calm. One of the officers approached her cautiously. "Ma'am, we need you to step down from the porch." She blinked slowly. She wouldn't stop crying, she said, gesturing toward Ava. She was making too much noise. I was just trying to help. They cuffed her without resistance. She didn't yell, didn't protest, just looked around with an eerie calm, like she was confused about why the world was reacting this way. An ambulance arrived moments later, and the EMTs gently took Ava from my arms. She didn't speak. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. Her hands were trembling uncontrollably. One of the paramedics asked me if she had any injuries. I didn't know how to answer. No cuts, I wanted to say. Just trauma. Just something that will live in her nervous system for the rest of her life. At the ER, they examined Ava thoroughly. No physical damage. No bruises. Just a sky-high heart rate, cold sweats, and dissociation. The psychologist on call gave it a name, acute stress reaction, a form of temporary psychological shock. "She's safe now," he said, "but this will take time." I sat beside her in the hospital bed all night, holding her hand, watching her sleep in fits and starts. Every time she stirred, she muttered pieces of Karen's words. "Too loud. Don't cry. Or else." I whispered comfort back, over and over again, like a lullaby meant to undo the horror. Back home the next day, the police called to update me. Karen had been arrested for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, child endangerment, and unlawful detainment. But her lawyer was already arguing that she had a history of mental instability and needed treatment, not punishment. I didn't care what they called it. I knew what I saw. So, did Mr. Bennett, who gave a full statement and handed over his door cam footage that captured the entire scene. In the days that followed, news of the incident spread, first among the neighbors, then online. Someone, maybe a local reporter, got wind of the story. I got calls from journalists, bloggers, advocates. People wanted to know how a woman like Karen had been allowed to hold power in our HOA despite repeated warnings and complaints. The truth was, no one had ever really looked until it was too late. The HOA released a cold, generic statement. We are aware of the unfortunate situation involving one of our residents. While we are deeply saddened by the events, we trust law enforcement to manage the matter with care. No epaledi, no accountability. Nothing. Karen, shockingly, was out on bail within 48 hours. Her family posted bond. She was ordered to stay 500 feet away from us pending trial, but she still lived in the house across the street. She still walked past her home. No more smirks. No more eye contact. Just a blank shell in yoga pants and sunglasses, pretending nothing had happened. Ava didn't leave the house for 2 weeks. She didn't speak for 6 days. Every time someone knocked on the door, she hid behind the couch. She wet the bed. She wouldn't eat unless I sat right next to her. She jumped at shadows, flinched at Ray's voices on TV. The trauma had buried itself in her bones. And I was drowning in guilt for leaving, for not predicting this, for trusting a system that had failed us from day one. But I also knew this wasn't over. Karen may have walked free temporarily, but the world had seen her now. And we had witnesses, footage, and a growing community of people who were no longer willing to be silent. This wasn't just about what happened with the knife. It was about everything that led to that moment. Every ignored letter, every overlooked threat, every time someone in power chose comfort over truth. And now, it was my turn to fight back. For Ava. For every child like her. For every family silenced by fear. Because I had seen the worst happen in broad daylight, and I refused to let it happen again. The days after the attack felt like we were living inside a slow-moving nightmare, the kind where everything looks the same on the outside, the walls, the furniture, the sunlight filtering in through the blinds, but nothing feels real anymore. Ava stopped speaking the moment we came home from the hospital. Not in protest, not dramatically. She just went quiet, as if her voice had been taken with the same blade Karen held to her neck. She refused to eat unless I sat right beside her and cut the food into tiny, perfect squares. She'd flinch at the creak of the front door, hide behind the couch when someone knocked, and cry silently into her blanket at night when she thought I wasn't listening. I stopped working altogether. There was no option, no thought of juggling Zoom calls or freelance deadlines when my daughter was unraveling before my eyes. I emailed my clients, stepped away from every project, and devoted every waking hour to helping Ava feel human again. It was like starting from zero. Her therapist said she was exhibiting symptoms of trauma-induced mutism and acute PTSD. She needs safety, consistency, control, she said, and time. A lot of time. But we didn't have the luxury of peace, not with Karen still living across the street, still pretending she hadn't done anything wrong. She walked her poodle like nothing had happened. She watered her rose bushes in silence, sunglasses covering the vacancy in her eyes. And the worst part? The HOA still hadn't said a word to us directly. Not a call, not an apology, not even a check-in to ask if Ava was okay. When I finally emailed them, attaching all police reports, witness statements, and medical notes, I got a cold response. We are investigating the situation and encourage all residents to avoid escalating neighborhood tensions. As if we had caused this. As if we were to blame for what happened. A few days later, a letter appeared in our mailbox, not from the police, not from the city, but from the HOA board itself. It accused me of creating a hostile atmosphere and referenced my ongoing pattern of confrontation and emotional volatility. They claimed my actions, my emails, my complaints had provoked unnecessary strain among community members and violated the HOA's civility clause. I read that sentence 5 times before I let myself cry. They were painting me as the problem. They were erasing Ava from the narrative, erasing Karen's knife, and turning the spotlight on the mother who dared to make noise. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Ava had gone to sleep, staring at the stack of papers and evidence I'd begun compiling. Police reports, therapist notes, HOA email, witness statements, photographs. It was growing into something massive, something undeniable, a living, breathing record of every failure we'd endured, every moment someone could have acted but didn't, every sign ignored, every warning shrugged off. I labeled a folder for justice. I didn't know yet if I'd pursue legal action or public exposure or both. I just knew I couldn't sit in silence anymore. I began reaching out to advocacy groups, disability rights attorneys, trauma support networks, even journalists who'd reported on previous HOA abuses. The silence was no longer just suffocating, it was fuel. Ava, meanwhile, began drawing again. Nothing like before, no dolphins or skies or stories. Just shapes, abstract swirls, circles filled with black scribbles. Sometimes a figure standing alone in the corner of a page. But it was something. It meant she was still in there, somewhere, trying to climb out of the darkness Karen had shoved her into. And I promised myself I would be her ladder. I would not let this place destroy her spirit. I would not let Karen become the final word in Ava's story. Every breath my daughter took, every tiny step toward healing, became my reason to keep fighting. Because what happened wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was violence, plain and simple. And no matter how many letters the HOA sent, no matter how many neighbors turned away, we would not be erased. Not this time. Not ever again. The police may have done their part in arresting Karen, but the real investigation didn't begin until I brought in Dana Walsh, a civil rights attorney referred to me by a local disability advocacy group that had read about Ava's story online. Dana wasn't just another lawyer, she was a force. Calm, precise, and deeply empathetic, she walked into our home like she already knew exactly what needed to be done. The first thing she said after reviewing the evidence was she should never have been in a position of authority, let alone living next to a child. Dana requested all police reports, incident documentation, and camera footage, then quietly began digging. Within a week, she uncovered what the HOA had either ignored or deliberately hidden. Karen had a history, a dark one. 3 years earlier, she had been living in a different HOA community across the city, one where she served as board president. She'd stepped down after repeated accusations of targeted hostility, including formal harassment claims from a single mother with an autistic son who said Karen threatened eviction over too many sensory toys left on the lawn. That woman eventually moved, but the HOA records remained, buried in board minutes and dispute filings. Dana got her hands on them all, but it didn't stop there. We found a restraining order filed 5 years ago by a neighbor who described Karen as mentally unstable and fixated on families with special needs children. That neighbor claimed Karen once stood outside her door for 3 hours straight, muttering about order and quiet. It had been quietly dismissed after Karen agreed to attend a behavioral health program, one that she reportedly never completed. None of this was disclosed when Karen moved to our neighborhood. No red flags were raised because she was polite, organized, and spoke in HOA language, structure, appearance, order. She was exactly the kind of person HOA boards favored. Someone who kept things clean. But clean, we learned, didn't mean safe. Dana compiled all of this into a thick, meticulously documented file. Printed screenshots, psychological history, character statements, legal filings. She labeled it pattern of neglect and danger. Alongside it, we had the testimony of Mr. Bennett, who had bravely come forward with his door camera footage and a notarized statement about what he saw the day Karen held the knife to Ava's neck. The video, grainy but clear enough, showed Ava standing on the porch, visibly frightened. It showed Karen reaching behind her and holding something that gleamed in the sunlight. It showed me running from a car, screaming. The footage was damning. When Dana reviewed it, she said, quietly, "This isn't just a civil matter anymore. This is federal grounds for a hate crime and ADA-based harassment." She filed a formal lawsuit against Karen for assault with a deadly weapon, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and disability-based discrimination. But she didn't stop there. She also filed against the HOA for gross negligence, failure to protect a disabled minor, and complicity in a hostile environment. "They ignored you for months," she told me. "They protected her instead of your daughter. And now, we're going to make sure the world knows." The lawsuits triggered a wave of discovery, and with it came cracks in the silence. A former HOA board member anonymously contacted Dana to confirm that complaints about Karen had been swept under the rug. "She made people uncomfortable, sure," the email read, "but no one wanted to confront her. She was too well connected. And honestly, we didn't want to deal with the drama." That statement said everything. No one wanted to deal with the drama. So they let a dangerous woman torment a child in the name of keeping the neighborhood orderly. But now there was no more hiding, no more sealed files, no more passive silence. The world was watching, and for the first time in a long time, Ava's story was being heard. Not as a whisper behind closed doors, but as a cry for justice loud enough to shake the foundation of every system that failed her. The reckoning came faster than I expected, and louder than I ever dared to hope. Once Dana filed the lawsuits, the story gained momentum like a match dropped in dry grass. Local news stations picked it up first, running headlines like HOA Horror, Disabled Child Attacked by Board Member, and Neighborhood Ignored Mothers Pleas Until It Was Too Late. The footage from Mr. Bennett's camera aired on primetime TV, blurred to protect Ava's identity, but clear enough to send shockwaves through the community. And then came the flood. Disability advocacy groups from across the country began sharing Ava's story. Hashtags like #JusticeForAva, #ProtectDisabledChildren, and #HOAAbuse trended online. People were angry, not just at Karen, but at the system that enabled her. The outcry was overwhelming, and for once, it worked. Karen's court date was moved up. The evidence was irrefutable. The footage, the eyewitnesses, the past complaints, the threatening notes, and Ava's psychological evaluation. Karen's lawyer tried the mental health defense, claiming she suffered from a dissociative episode and wasn't in control of her actions. But the prosecution argued, convincingly, that she had a long, documented history of deliberate hostility toward disabled families, and her behavior was not the result of a break, but of a pattern. She was found guilty of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, unlawful restraint, and felony-level child endangerment. She was sentenced to 6 years in a psychiatric corrections facility with a mandatory no-contact order protecting Ava and our family for life. But it didn't end there. The HOA was hit hard, too. Dana's civil suit exposed not just their negligence, but their willful complicity. Records showed they had received 9 separate complaints about Karen over 2 years, including 2 directly from me, and took no meaningful action. They settled out of court, but the terms were public. They paid a 6-figure fine, issued a formal public apology, and were ordered by the state to implement new anti-discrimination policies, mandatory sensitivity training, and ADA compliance monitoring. Their president resigned. 2 board members were removed. The neighborhood changed overnight, not just because of policy, but because people finally opened their eyes. The same neighbors who once ignored us now brought flowers. Parents who once avoided Ava at the park approached to say they were sorry. Some cried. Some admitted they had been afraid of Karen. 2, afraid of being targeted, ostracized, fined. And while I appreciated their words, I never forgot how long it took for them to find their courage. I didn't need their pity. I needed them to remember. We didn't stay. Once the court orders were finalized, once Ava was stable enough to sleep through the night without waking up in terror, I packed our things and left Parkview Meadows for good. We moved to a quieter neighborhood, one with no HOA, no Karen, no whispered threats or sideways glances. Our new home wasn't perfect, a fixer-upper with creaky stairs and weeds in the garden, but it was ours, and more than that, it was peaceful. Ava started drawing again. This time, not shapes and shadows, but sunflowers. Bright, messy, full of life. Justice didn't erase what happened. It didn't undo the trauma, but it sent a message to every silent board member, every system that looked the other way. You may ignore us, but when we rise, we roar, and this time we were heard. Healing isn't a straight line. It doesn't come with a date on the calendar or a back to normal switch. It comes in the quiet moments, the ones you don't expect. For us, it came one rainy afternoon when Ava was sitting by the window, sketching. I was washing dishes, half distracted, when I heard it. Her voice. Soft, almost unsure, like it had forgotten how to be used. She said, "Do you think sunflowers are brave?" I froze. Then I dropped the dish towel and walked to her side, blinking back tears. "Yes," I whispered. "I think they're the bravest flowers of all." She nodded, then turned back to her drawing, a bright yellow bloom rising up from gray scribbles. And just like that, after weeks of silence, shadows, and fear, my daughter came back to me. The scars are still there. Some nights, she still wakes up crying. She startles easily when a car backfires or someone raises their voice too quickly. But she's painting again, singing softly under her breath again, slowly smiling, her eyes a little wiser, her heart still gentle. She's not just surviving, she's reclaiming the joy that was stolen from her. And I see her strength in ways I never fully understood before. Because trauma doesn't just break you, it reshapes you. And Ava, in all her quiet resilience, is becoming someone even stronger than before. As her mother, I still carry guilt, the kind that lingers even when you know you did everything you could. But I've learned something, too. I've learned that protecting your child sometimes means making noise when the world tells you to stay quiet. That healing takes more than time. It takes truth, justice, and community. And most of all, it takes love that refuses to back down. We share this story not to relive the worst day of our lives, but to show what comes after. Because there are families like ours in every neighborhood. Children like Ava who just want to be seen, heard, left in peace. And mothers like me who are done waiting for permission to speak. If you're one of them, if you've been hurt, ignored, pushed aside, I want you to know, there's life after the pain. It's not easy. It's not instant, but it's real, and it's waiting for you. Today, Ava paints her sunflower pictures and hangs them on the wall by our new front door. She says they're for anyone who walks in feeling afraid, so they'll know they're in a safe place. That's who she is now, not the girl with the knife at her neck, but the girl who grew stronger anyway, the girl who bloomed. If you've made it this far, thank you, not just for watching, but for feeling, for bearing witness to a story that was never meant to happen, but did. What happened to Ava could have happened to any child, any family, in any neighborhood. And the truth is, it's still happening in silent homes behind carefully trimmed lawns under the watch of people who pretend not to see. This wasn't just a story about one woman with a knife. This was about every ignored complaint, every dismissed cry for help, every rule and policy used to punish instead of protect. And the victims? They're always the same: the vulnerable, the disabled, the families who are just trying to live in peace. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Backhand index pointing right, talk about it. Backhand index pointing right, share it. Backhand index pointing right, ask your HOA how they protect families like ours. Backhand index pointing right, speak up if you see injustice in your community, even if it's uncomfortable. Especially then, because silence enables cruelty. And speaking out, that's how we take back power. To the parents watching this who feel alone in their fight, you're not. To the children who've been made to feel like they don't belong, you do. And to the Karens of the world who believe no one will ever challenge them, we're not afraid of you anymore. We survived, we spoke up, and we'll keep fighting not just for us, but for every voice that was silenced before us. Clapperboard, this is our story. This is the HOA Stories, and we'll never be silent again.